and welcome to Worth It. I'm your host, Lonnie Buse, on this network, Hypno 24/7 Live. And before I introduce my amazing guest to you today, I encourage you to check out all the other shows on this network, such as Kaz Riley's Trancing in the Sheets, where she explores the topic of sexual freedom, or Greg Beckett's Time to Get Unstuck, where him and his guest ponder one word and have a meaningful conversation around that word, or Paul Ramsey's The Fat Hypnotist, where he chronicles his weight loss journey. And today I have for you Damon Cart. Damon is an NLP teacher and coach and certified hypnotist based in Santa Cruz, California. His skill has been recognized by some of the most influential in the NLP industry, such as Steve Andreas, his former mentor, Judith DeLozier, and Doug O'Brien, who I also interviewed for this series. Damon's vision is to teach as many lives as possible using NLP to help them actualize their greatest potentials. And he's doing just that. I've been following his work for years and his YouTube channel, Life Mastery Gym, which has over 34,000 subscribers. Welcome, Damon, to Worth It.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Okay. So as you know, we're discussing imposter syndrome and kind of all that's revolved around that. Basically that kind of feeling like a fraud, even though you have success. And it's a topic kind of close to my heart, unfortunately, in some ways, because of something I've battled with for years. And at this point, I think I've kind of come over the hump on that a little bit, thankfully. So I just basically wanted to get your input first. Is it something, this phenomenon, is it something you've ever experienced yourself? And have you ever addressed this with your clients?
Absolutely. I think if you're not regarded as a success among people, this shows up as low self-worth. That's typically how we experience it. So if we're experiencing low self-worth, which almost everybody, like I would say 99% of the population experiences, it's very rare. I do come across people from time to time who just seems to not have that experience in life, or not in any particular context. Sometimes it's context specific for people, and for some people they just feel it all the time. Well, I'm somebody who felt it quite a bit from, I remember, teenage years up until just a few years ago, actually. And what I realized is that you have your values, the things that in life that you value, like kindness, love, joy, happiness, all those things. And if you're not experiencing your values as qualities of who you are, then you will feel like you're lacking in self-worth. Now, what some people will do as a result, they will try to counterbalance that by having a lot of success in the world. They'll accomplish a lot because they're trying to balance that equation. And then what you get there is you get these very successful CEOs, these very successful entrepreneurs who then feel like imposters, because they have the success all around them. The evidence is all around them saying you are very successful, you are worth a lot, but they're not feeling it from the inside because they look to resolve the issue, resolve the problem through an outside solution. So, and it will work for some people, in the sense that they will create that success around them, they will create that perceived value around them, but they still don't feel it. So they feel like imposters. So I would say many people come to me for just feeling like they lack self-worth. And a lot of times they don't realize that's what it is. And it's really the clients that I have that are the most successful clients who are often coming to me saying, I wouldn't admit this to anybody else, but I don't feel like I deserve this. I don't feel like I've earned this. I feel like I'm a fraud, and I don't know how to manage that. I don't know how to handle it. So then we go to work on their sense of self and building up those qualities within them that they value highly. And once that happens, then the confidence is there and the self-esteem is there. And so then they feel fine. Everything feels like it connects.
And it kind of leads in a little bit to my next question, because I was wondering, since they say 70% of the population experiences this kind of phenomenon of feeling like a fraud at least once in their life. And do you feel like it's basically because people aren't focusing on their values? Is that?
Well, it's that, but a lot of times you are sort of like focused on your values, but you don't feel like you're embodying them. You don't feel like you're in alignment with them. So when that happens, then your self-esteem goes down. And when your self-esteem is down, then you have the tendency to experience what we call low self-worth.
Mhm.
But low self-worth actually is something that happens, it's usually triggered early in childhood,
Mhm.
where you don't really have a sense of self. Your sense of self is you get from the people around you, your parents, authority figures, teachers who are telling you, you don't have anything to reference it by other than what people tell you. And so what happens is that at some point, especially with someone who, the child depends on for everything, their sense of self, their food, their nourishing, just keeping alive.
Mhm.
At some point, if a parent in a very limited way of communication uh, communicates something that the child experiences as the love being conditional, like
Mhm.
I have to earn it, I have to do my homework to be loved, or I have to behave in order to be loved, otherwise the love will be taken away from me. That's
Mhm.
a very typical one where somebody will experience that, or it'll form into a belief, and as they get older, that belief really solidifies that unless I'm earning love, unless I'm earning my right to exist, then I might not have a right to exist. I might not deserve anything. I might not deserve love, and that's usually what that comes from, that sense of low self-worth. And if it's never dealt with, it doesn't matter how successful you become and how loved you are, you still are sort of isolating yourself from those, from receiving that
Mhm.
based on this very limiting belief.
Mhm. And you mentioned that self-worth has an impact on self-esteem. So how would you define self-esteem in general, considering that?
Self-esteem is how you feel about yourself. So, and this is what happens a lot of times, is people will confuse self-concept and self-esteem.
Mhm.
So self-concept is the generalization you make about yourself, about who you are, based on all of the qualities you believe you possess and don't possess. So you can call those qualities smaller generalizations. I can say, well, I'm a kind person, I'm an imperfect person. So those are just like two generalizations I make about myself. But it's the combination of all of the generalizations you make about yourself, good and bad, that then gives you a greater generalization, which is your sense of self. Who am I? You know, to explain that, if I were to explain who I am, if you were to explain who you are, you would have to, do it in chunks because it's such a big generalization. But overall, we have this sense of self. Well, when I step back and say, well, how do I feel about myself? My All of my imperfections and all of the things that are positive and all of the things that are negative, I put that all together and I step back and I say, well, how do I feel about that? That's my self-esteem.
Mhm.
So if I like myself, my self-esteem is high. If I don't like myself, or I feel like I'm not deserving, or I haven't done enough in my life to be loved, I haven't done enough to be successful, then doesn't matter how much people love me. It doesn't matter how much success I have. I'm not going to believe it. And that's where that imposter syndrome comes from.
Yeah, I was gonna just ask because when you kind of focus on self-esteem and like, do I like myself, that concept, it requires you to sort of be an objective observer of yourself, right? Like dissect that and look at yourself and give yourself constructive criticism.
Which is an
So,
illusion, by the way. You can't do that.
yeah, I was gonna say, because like even if someone is like, do I like myself, and you're contemplating that, if someone who has imposter syndrome, that like if they don't like qualities about themselves, that might just deflate their kind of ego a bit. So it's like, how do you kind of step away from that, and so you can kind of look at that objectively and go, okay, these are the qualities I want to work on, and not take it all so personally. If
But
that
you
makes
can't, because it's,
sense. Right?
it's an illusion. But we do it anyway.
Yeah.
It doesn't
Yeah.
stop us from trying. And that's where we get caught in these loops that just go on and on and on with no solution to it, because it is a delusion to think that you can. But we can put all that to rest, and we can say, okay, well, what are my values, which most people don't know.
Mm.
And if I just ask that question to anybody, they're going to start sort of regurgitating the values that were instilled in them by their parents, by their family, by society, by their culture. But very few people are really well aware of what their true core values are. And that will, you can come out as a NLP. There's an easy NLP exercise just to ask somebody, okay, what do you want? And it can start with something very materialistic or very trivial, but you keep asking the question, well, what's important about that, or what would that do for you? And what happens is it goes deeper and deeper until you really start hitting those core values like joy, peace, happiness, passion, love. Those are the really high level values. And then what I do next with people is I say, okay, are you joyful?
Mhm.
Are you peaceful? And most of the time they don't feel that they are. And I say, okay, well, this is an obvious problem. So say like your three highest values, if they're not showing up as qualities of who you are, no wonder you feel like you feel if you're not feeling good about yourself. If you feel like you have an imposter syndrome, well, that's exactly why, because you value these things so highly, but you don't believe you are these things. So for example, if I value kindness and I do something that's kind, I'm going to feel good about myself. My self-esteem is going to go up. If I value kindness and I do something that's cruel,
Mhm.
I'm going to feel bad about myself. But here's the interesting thing. This is how I reframe that. You're feeling bad about it is a measurement of the degree of commitment you have to the value of kindness.
You're Steve go, what? All right, can you say that again? And because I was like, wait a minute, that's very interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And then so
Unpack that.
everyone listening, take notice of any time you feel bad about yourself. You do something and you feel bad. Okay. That's a wonderful opportunity to get clear about something that's probably unconscious for you. And that is, what is the value you violated within yourself? You valued something and you felt like you behaved in the opposite way, and that's why you feel bad. Okay, whether or not that's true, that's a different discussion. But you feel bad and you go, okay, well, what did I do that is now making me feel bad? Because we do things from time to time and we feel bad, like, oh, I said that to that person, I didn't mean that, or something like that.
Right.
And then that's a wonderful time to say, okay, well, what am I feeling right now? And so let's say I value kindness, but right now I'm feeling cruel because I was mean to somebody.
Mhm.
And now I feel bad. So that feeling bad is a measurement of the degree of commitment I have to the value of kindness.
Mm.
So knowing that should make you feel better. So you could say, oh, wow, okay, so this feeling bad means that I'm actually very committed to its opposite. And the only thing is that I behaved in a way that I feel violated that. And now it becomes easy to correct. Now I don't just get stuck in feeling bad about myself. Now I go, okay, well, now all I have to do is go make it right. Maybe I need to go tell that person I'm sorry. And then maybe I can make myself feel really good by going out in the world and doing something that's kind, because that's what I value. And so now my self-esteem is back up. So many people get stuck in this because they feel the feeling, they're not sure how to stop it. They try to logic their way out of it, try to intellectualize it, and that's never going to work. But when you understand what your values are and that that's just a violation of one of your values, and you understand how this whole mechanism works, now you know how to go make it right and get yourself out of that stuck place. And the same thing is that what imposter syndrome is it's being stuck in that idea that, okay, here's all these things that I value, but I don't believe that I am those things. And the truth is that that's not true. And this is where it gets really hard to follow. Your self-concept is a lie because and I only say it's a lie because it's not the truth. And you will not know what the truth is. There's no way you can know the truth. You are not qualified to assess that, and no one is, because everybody's experiencing everything subjectively. Everything's passing through our subjective filters. So when I say, we were talking about the stepping back and looking at yourself and do I like myself? Well, that's an illusion that is looking at a lie, trying to assess it. It's like when you start thinking about it like that, it's like, okay, this is all rather silly to do that. But by understanding how your subjective experience functions in creating a sense of self, now it puts you back in control of figuring this thing out for yourself and moving forward and feeling good about your life and feeling like you have purpose and meaning, which is all going to come from within. It's never going to come from without, because if I'm propping myself up by my accomplishments and by what other people tell me, then I will live in insecurity for the rest of my life, because everything is conditioned on external results, which I really have no control over.
It's got very philosophical and deep, Damon. I love that. It made me think of so many different things at one time. It made me also think of that expression, which is how I also kind of view positive affirmations. And I know we have that same outlook on that. Like that expression, fake it until you make it, which is basically imitate a quality that you want And it's like, so if I were like, I'm confident, but if I don't feel it or believe it, like, I'm not going to embody confidence. So it's like, and I essentially kind of view positive affirmations like that as well, as if, you know, just say something to yourself, but if you're not congruent internally with that belief system, it's just kind of some, you know, I don't know, something, you know, imaginative kind of fleeting experience. So, and I guess it kind of leads into more of NLP and deepening into that. I mean, you know, NLP is based on modeling. So it's like, how is that basically kind of stepping into or trying to mastering someone's thought processes or physiology, and someone who's excelling at a quality that you possess or that you want. How is that kind of different than just faking it till you make it? So how is it more NLP about embodying those qualities that you want, especially for people who have no idea what NLP is?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. So what you're talking about with the affirmations is, well, in NLP, we have something called congruence, which a lot of people get mixed up with, and I did for a long time, with ecology. Ecology is external, congruence is internal. So congruence is, you know, if I'm 200 pounds overweight and I look in the mirror and I say, no, I'm healthy, I'm a healthy weight. Well, congruence is going to kick in and say, no, you're not. And that's a healthy part of ourselves that keeps us connected with reality. You know, like I said, everything's subjective and everything is, you could call it a lie. And so what people think then as, well, I can make up whatever I want, but no, you can't, because reality will smack you in the face. There is an objective reality that is happening. We just can't know it directly, but it doesn't mean it's not happening. So we need to be accurate. We're never going to be perfect, but we need to be as accurate as possible. So when I look in the mirror and I say something that's not true, there's a very healthy part of me that pushes back and says, no, that's not true. And so now you're going to cultivate an internal conflict. And that's certainly not going to help you get to where you want to go. And you can pump yourself up with those things. You can say, I'm confident, and you can maybe kind of work, you know, a state of confidence up a little bit that way. But as soon as you walk out the front door and someone calls you a name or something like that, because there is no foundation for that confidence, it's going to be shattered immediately. So when it comes to NLP, we work with what is sensory based. So what do I see? What do I hear? What do I feel? And how do I represent that internally? And that's what feels real. Just saying words and trying to convince myself of something that's not true, that is not going to feel real. Our experiences feel real. Even though our experiences are in the past, they're not happening right now. We have a way of representing them, and we do it through time, and we even do it through space. When I say space, I mean like context. Where did the experience happen, and how is it? You know, all of your experience are going to be represented by the five senses, or at least one of the five senses, maybe probably not all of them. And there will be a space element, and there will be a time element. And so these are, you know, three dimensions that an affirmation does not have. So when I focus on what we call reference experiences, and I say, well, okay, well, you know, I've never done an Ironman before, and I'm feeling really not confident about trying. And this is another thing that I get clients coming to me for. They always want the confidence first before they go out and do something. And I'm like, that's not a good idea. You know, I don't want to give you confidence that makes you feel like you know how to fly a plane when you don't. You're going to cause a lot of trouble. You're going to endanger people's lives. Like, that's not what you want. But some people need the confidence to take the first step. Okay. So how do we get this person who's never done an Ironman before, who's afraid to even take the first step? Well, then we go to reference experiences. Okay, well, what's the time when you did something that you had never done before and you made it happen? And so that you can bring that person's attention to that reference, and they can say, oh yeah, okay, I did do that. And then say, okay, well, when was another time that happened? And then you keep referencing these experiences, especially going way back even into childhood. Well, at one point you tied your shoes, and you had never tied your shoes before, but you learned how to do it. At one time you couldn't read, and then you learned how to read. And so you start bringing in all of these reference experiences, and this starts to become very, very powerful. And the person will start to experience, based on sensory-based evidence within themselves, that, oh yeah, I can do this. I can at least take the first step. I have everything I need to take the first step. And I know this because I have so many reference experiences of doing that and it working out. It can get a lot more detailed than that and a lot more complex than that. But to answer your question, that's basically how we do it. We use reference experiences. Now we can actually use other people's reference experiences, and we do. And for anyone who has kids and and I don't care who you are, you've experienced this if you have kids, acting like your parents, and it sneaks up on you. And you'll find yourself doing that, and you're like, oh my God, I'm turning into my parents. Well, why is that? Well, before you're a parent, you have no experiences of being a parent. So where do you get your reference experiences for being a parent? You get it from your parents when you were being raised. Now you go second position. For you NLPers, we go second position with our parent to access a reference in order to figure out and operate in a situation I've never functioned in before. So I'm using my parents' references, and when that happens, yes, I start to turn into my parents. But of course, I can stop this because your parents, the way they raised you might not be ideal. You've learned a lot since then. We learn a lot as time goes on about what makes better parents, and you can interrupt that and say, okay, well, even though I don't have a reference experience for this, I have the reference of the opposite of the way that I want to experience. So now I can go in that opposite direction. So you can use the reference to bounce off of. It's probably a longer explanation than what you were.
Oh, good. I appreciate the long explanations. Yeah, there's so much going on. So I'm going to go backtrack a little bit to values, because I'm going to try to make it so you don't coach me, Damon, because maybe ultimately this is what I need to address. But so sometimes I notice, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm probably wrong, that sometimes my value, which is very important to me, can still bump up against that fraud-like feeling. So for instance, for me, growth and learning is very high value. Like, I love to learn. I'm constantly taking courses. I'm constantly training. But I think there's also part of me that's doing it is because I'm feeding into the belief that, like, I just don't know enough. And then I start comparing myself to other people in my industry that might be very far advanced. And so I try to not to do that and give myself unrealistic expectations, but I still sometimes have this feeling like, oh, this is a high value of mine, but yet is it still feeding into something that is feeding into that kind of fraud-like feeling of, because I'm constantly studying, constantly learning, because I feel like I'm not know enough, but I'm still doing the work. I'm still serving as a practitioner, but then there's this is making sense. So, yeah.
Well, so I can just try to give you sort of the overview and the intellectual understanding of what's going on. But yes, when you ask me a question like that, I kind of go into coach mode and I say, okay, well,
that's fine.
It's better not to just tell you, and it's better to ask you questions that then come up with the results. So which do you prefer?
You can do what feels right for
okay.
you.
So what then I would ask you is it possible to love learning and growing without comparing yourself to other people? And if you're absolutely 100% enough as you are?
If I felt I was 100% enough as I am, then yes. And this is where I kind of rationalize and go back and forth, because there's a part of me that goes, I don't need to compare myself to others. And I like to compare myself to how I was and how I wasn't in the past and how I'm evolving as a person, like comparing myself to myself and go, oh, wow, I've learned a lot and I'm developing a lot. But then there's sometimes I'll still go into that other trap, which I know is a trap because it's just like a downward spiral if I go there. So I try not to. So I kind of still go back and forth a little bit, but I'm trying not to. But
okay.
Yes, if I were answering your question, I'd be, I wouldn't have to. I wouldn't have to compare myself to others.
Well, but more specifically,
yes,
would you still love learning and growing, even if you felt like you were completely enough?
Oh, for sure.
Okay.
Yes.
And you would still do it even if there was no one else to come. Let's say you were so good, you were peerless, and no one was as good as you. Would you still love learning and growing?
Oh, for sure. I do it every day. So what you were just saying is,
and it sounded obvious to me that you're basing your motivation on a false assumption. You're saying, well, if I don't compare myself, and I'm not saying entirely, but there's a part of you thinking, well, if I don't compare myself to others, and if I don't feel like I don't know enough, I won't continue to learn and grow.
Mhm.
And so what I would say is trust that if you value learning and growing, you're naturally going to gravitate to that, because you will feel that you're self-validating when you behave in alignment with your values. So you value learning, you value growing, and anytime you behave in alignment with that, your self-esteem goes up. And especially if you feel like you embody the identity of a learner, of like a student, of someone who grows, then you're naturally going to stay there. And you don't need the validation of comparison to others. You don't need the drive or the push that the feeling of not knowing enough makes you feel. You can do without those things. Now, that's the fast and dirty way of working. And you might just go, oh, yeah, I don't need those things. I totally value learning and growing outside of all those things. And then right then, just in that understanding, you drop with that other stuff.
Mm.
Now, we'd want to test this out and see how things go for you as life goes on. And even if you indulge in that a little bit, we all do to a certain extent. When nobody's completely free of comparison, but we know that it's not a healthy thing to do. But we would want to check in with you and say, okay, well, do you feel like you still have to do those things in order to drive yourself to learn and grow, or is learning and growing just something you naturally value, and so you naturally do it, you're naturally motivated to do it? And check in with that. And if you still feel like later on that it's still very much connected to comparison and feeling like you're not enough or you don't know enough, well, then we'd want to go deeper into those values and deeper into those beliefs and figure out what's holding them in place, and then undo them and replace that belief with a different belief.
Good. Good. It's a lot of food for thought. So I was like, oh yeah, okay. Excellent. So I'm also doing that for others because I know other people kind of fall in this trap of like, because it's one of the Dr. Valerie Young created this whole kind of grouping of people who kind of face this phenomenon, and the expert was one of them, where people just constantly keep learning, and because they feel like they don't know enough. So that's kind of one of the subgroups, which I know I fell into. So kind of was like dissecting it for me and others who might be falling into that same subgroup. So thank you for that. And so kind of leading into all of this, like, so say somebody, maybe it's more about values or self-concept or self-esteem. And you kind of were feeding it into this program a lot already, but what other kind of creative solutions can someone, do for themselves to kind of step outside of this imposter phenomenon? If you want to kind of, I know you already kind of walked me through a process, but anything else that you want to kind of offer up?
Well, there's, it's the two main processes would be the self-concept model, the thing that I base all my coaching on, that Steve Andreas taught me and mentored me for years before he passed away. That's what did it for me. Like I'd come to him several times and said, it took me a while just to admit that I was experiencing low self-worth and low self-esteem. Like, who wants to admit that? We think of self-esteem as being that thing that, oh yeah, you learn about that in some, I don't know, sometimes in PE or in health class or something like that, they talk about self-esteem and you're just like, okay, that's for kids. And it's like, no, most adults are suffering from low self-esteem. And so nobody wants to admit it, but when you can finally own up to it and say, yeah, that's what I'm experiencing. The self-concept is really the only thing that worked for me, because it actually took some years of self-work and hiring coaches and even going into therapy to work it out. The other thing that I would say is re-imprinting was definitely an important NLP technique or process to do, because that what I was saying about that limited communication, the parent is acting in a limited way or communicating in a limited way that the child then picks up as, well, I'm not loved unless I do this or that, or unless I'm like this or that. And what happens is the whole comparison thing that you were just talking about, that comes from the same thing. It's like, your parents say, well, why can't you do this like your brother? Or why can't you do this like Sally does, or whatever? So that's where that comparison comes from. And so it might take several re-imprints. It might just take one. where you go back into that childhood experience that most people have forgotten, and realize what was actually going on at the time, and realize that, your parents, as well, as well-meaning as they are, they just communicated something in a very limited way, and that's not your fault. And it's easy to forgive them at that point, especially if you are a parent. That's one thing that happens a lot when you become a parent. You become very forgiving of your parents. And so, I mean, those are the mainly the two things. Is that sometimes you have to go deep into your childhood memories and find these places in your life where you've isolated parts of yourself, and when you experience pain, whether physical or emotional, the knee-jerk reaction is to move away from it. So you experience that in childhood, you try to wall it off and try to not feel it, and then out of that walling it off, you create a limitation, and out of that limitation creates a belief about who you are in the world. And sometimes these beliefs stick around for a long time, and they're almost impossible to get to like talk yourself out of it. And that's a lot of how we try to do things. We just say, well, I believe this, but it can't be true. And that doesn't get you very far. So it often is a good idea to get a coach or a therapist kind of walk you back through that whole thing, and you relive it, and you undo the limitation, you reconnect with yourself. And then a lot of people say, well, aren't I just making all of this up? And it's like, but yeah, you're always making all of this up, because all of your memories are now made up because they've already happened. So you're carrying all this stuff around with you. So knowing how to go back in and navigate these things and bring greater understanding and bring resources to those early childhood experiences where you've experienced pain and suffering, which created limitations, which created limiting beliefs. Other than that, I don't really know of any other way to go back and do it. I'm not saying there isn't another way, but as far as my expertise goes, it's basically comes down to the self-concept model that I use, and then re-imprinting.
Excellent. And for somebody who wants to know more about you and the self-concept model, where can people get in touch with you and find out?
Most people find me on my YouTube channel. I've made over 600 videos on NLP and other personal development, self-improvement related topics. So my Life Mastery Gym YouTube channel, and then also my website, lifemasterygym.com. And I give a lot of free information away and free trainings. So my thing is that, a lot of NLP trainings are very expensive, whether they're in person or online. And what you want to do is take advantage of the free stuff first, figure out if NLP is, if it fits, and then go from there. And that was really the basis of the YouTube channel that I created, was like, okay, well, what if people had access to good NLP information? Because for me, when I took my first training, it was a huge leap of faith. Fortunately, I'd had some positive NLP experiences, starting as far back as in college, with a professor that I had. I basically, in one session of depression that I had been experiencing for months, went away in one session. And that's when I was like, okay, this NLP stuff, there's something to it. But unfortunately, I wasn't able to actually practice it or take a training until about a decade later. And at that time, and when I was in college, there wasn't YouTube. There wasn't a lot of free resources out there. I wanted to take NLP training back then, and it just wasn't available. And even if I could have, I was a poor college student, so I probably couldn't have afforded it. So there's so much out there now. There's so many resources. And so I really wanted to contribute to putting out really good information, really good NLP information that people can try out for themselves, and then say, okay, does this work for me? Is this something I want to pursue? And then go from there.
Excellent. And, before we close this out, is there anything that you want to address about this topic that maybe I haven't mentioned, or, about these kind of, imposter phenomenon feelings, or, NLP or something? Yeah.
I think it's an amazing thing that we human beings do, where we walk around carrying around so much suffering and pain and just thinking that that's normal.
Yes.
And you know what I'm talking about. You're laughing. I can tell, like you really get it. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, you don't have to. You really don't have to. And there's nothing noble or admirable about carrying around pain and suffering, that you don't have to. And the problem with that goes even further if you do have kids or, family or whatever. If you're carrying around a lot of that stuff, the tendency is that, and whether or not you want to or not, you tend to spread it around. And so other people experience your pain and suffering, even if it's just from empathy, and that's not good for anybody. The other thing I would say is that, how I can trace my lineage back on why I do what I do, and it has to do with hearing my father listening to cassette tapes in his bedroom after it was lights out, after everybody had gone to bed, and finding out that it was Zig Ziglar and Jim Rohn and Tony Robbins, and this was sort of something that was on the side, whereas my family is very religious, and that was pushed on us really, really hard, which is probably one of the reasons why I'm not religious at all anymore. But I was always wondering, well, who are those people that he was listening to who kept, in so many words, repeating the same message, which is, whatever life has given you, whatever your situation is, whatever your physical being is, it does not matter. You can always improve it. You can always change it. You can always live a better life. And I just kept hearing that. And I have no doubt that got inside of me somewhere really, really deep. And that's what I've done with my own life. And then I got to a point where I was like, wow, I can really help other people do this too. So no matter who you are, no matter how much pain you're in, no matter how crappy you think the hand life has dealt you, you have the power and the control to change it, and not make it as, not be necessarily a movie star or somebody who's really rich and famous. That's not what you should be focused on, because that'll get you into trouble. But it's more about, who are you and how do you make your life even better and improve it and make it the absolute best that it can be. Every person can do that.
Excellent. Well, Damon, thank you for your time. And this is great. Yeah. I might be hitting you up again some point in the future. Talk about something else.
Your call.
All right, Damon. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you for watching this episode of Worth It. And if you're wondering where you can learn more about me, well, I'm a hypnotist, NLP practitioner, and energy healer based in Hollywood, California. You can book a session with me at the shop I work at by going to liberatehollywood.com. But if you're out of the state, I do work through Zoom. And you can find more about me on my website, LonnieBuess.com. That's LANIBUESS.com. Feel free to email me at change@LonnieBuess.com, or find me on Facebook at Coach Lonnie B, or Instagram at Lonnie_B_change. And check out my YouTube channel, Lonnie Buess, where you'll find a bunch of videos to watch. And if you want to join the Facebook group for this very show, go to facebook.com/groups/worthitshow. Thanks again for watching this episode. Feel free to email me to give me feedback on how you're loving it. And again, just remember, you're worth it. Until next time.